Since the powder necklace is loosely based on your own life, having been shipped off at the age of 12 to go to high school or to go to school in Ghana, what kind of preparation did your parents give you for that, right? And I imagine that was your first time.
Well,
was it your first time?
I mean, it was
Ghana?
my first time in memory. I went as a baby.
Okay, yeah. So, in your conscious memory, that was your first time.
Yeah.
Right.
They did trick us into going, but it was much more convoluted than the way it was in the book. I mean, those people, I'm like, wow, you guys, good scheming.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, they didn't really prepare us. But what I found is that initially, especially when we went on vacation, is what we thought it was. And I stayed with my grandmother. My grandmother owned a company. She was doing very well. We had cars and...
You had the maids
I mean, it was kind of jarring because that was not what I was expecting at all of Ghana. Even though my parents had told me Ghana is not what they say on TV or Africa is not what they're saying, it was not what I was expecting at all. So for me, I was having the best time. I mean, it was just like, my life was completely different. Like in the States, we lived in like a small apartment. Well, at the time we had moved, but we had a house. But it was just like, that was all a struggle. Everything seemed like a struggle.
Now you go back there and you're living like, this palatial life.
I mean, it wasn't even a palatial life, but it was just... It was nice. Like I recognized that, oh, okay, this is different. So that was cool. So I was just like, wow, this is kind of cool. We have a driver and drivers and, that kind of thing was interesting to me. Then the other things started to seep in because it was like we were living surrounded by the suburb, there was like a shanty town that was just before my grandmother's house, and it was like a shanty town, like what you see like on TV and all of that. So it was just kind of like, okay, you walk down to Shiashi, and Shiashi is like the shanty village, and there's no water there, and my grandmother's neighborhood, like it was just everyone sort of constructing these like huge mansions. So like there was like construction everywhere, and then the dirt roads, and that dichotomy struck me immediately. And even my grandmother at the time, her house was under construction, so we were living like in a half constructed house. But people would come over and they'd be like, "This house is amazing," and I'm like, "It's not even built. Like we're living in a construction site, you know." So it was just funny to me, like those little nuances were interesting. And then going from that to then going to school, I was getting used to this idea of being my grandmother's like little granddaughter from America, and then you're like in school, and
all those layers of the maid, the driver just gets stripped away.
And also too, what I think was my first real... Well, there were a couple of things that were really very different, but one thing that really struck me was that when, we realized that we were going to be staying there and we were going to school, was that I had to cut my hair.
Her aunt says to her, no matter where you were born, Brony, and how long you stay where you're Ghanaian, Ghana is your home, right? So Lila shakes her head and says, no, I'm English, right? Fast forward when she's in Long Island, and then she's trying to get into the school in Manhattan. She has this interview with Miss Nikki, and the first thing she says, I'm Ghanaian, right?
Yeah.
So it's sort of, and she went through this transformation from just thinking of herself as English to I'm Ghanaian, right? So that sort of dualism of identity, where sometimes the parents, I guess, they'll play a role, but what was sort of your experience with that, knowing that you were born here in America? Your parents are Ghanaian, and you went there,
When I was younger, I definitely did not want to be Ghanaian. I remember my parents, when I was very young, I could speak the language, and then there was a time when I just shut down. I would just only respond in English, and I just didn't want that. And I had picked up the subliminal cues all around that, like, being African was not what I wanted to be. And I lived in that. I thrived in that. Yeah. And then I go to Ghana, and being in Ghana, being American or being a brony had many advantages because I was sort of protected from doing certain things and, you know, just, oh, she's a brony, just leave her alone. This
which is why Leila didn't tell the senior prefect that she didn't let her know that she could understand
the language. Exactly. So, I mean, there was a lot of that, but I also I remember this girl, because my name, Ekua Brew-Hammond, is like a quintessential Fanti girl's name, right? So I remember this girl used to taunt me all the time in class, and she'd say, "Hey, Fantini on to Fanti," which means like a Fanti girl who doesn't know how to speak Fanti. So she used to taunt me with that all the time, and I'd be like, "Shut up." You know, but I think it started to, you know, hit me that, okay, wait a second, like, I'm part of something here. Yeah. And it's not cute that I'm not aware of it or I'm not embracing it. Yeah. And, you know, I lived in Ghana, I went to school there for 3 years. So throughout that process, obviously,
3 best years of your life.
Yeah, the best years of my life. Through that process, I really learned a lot about, you know, the culture through just living there, through school, through friendships made, etc. And I started to understand that, wow, this is an asset. And also too, like I said before, when I was living in the States, I had picked up all these cues that, like, being black, being dark-skinned, whatever, wasn't the bomb. Yeah. And when I was in Ghana, even though there was some distinction for, like, half caste or
the light skin
thing, but still, dark skinned people were good too. Yeah. And I just started understanding, like, wow, my name has a meaning, it has context, I'm part of something, and I was happy to have that. And when I came back to the States, I just started to realize, like, wow, like, I'm pretty cool. Like, I've traveled, I have a completely different experience, and I started to embrace that.
So in a way, that's really interesting. So in a way, it was sort of, okay, there's a defined identity that I could actually attach myself to that's, like, bigger than me, right? And then from there, start to identify with it.
To a certain extent, I mean, I think because I grew up in the States, I felt very, well, I knew I wasn't Black American or African American, but I really appreciated that culture because it was all around me. Yeah. And that's what Blackness was. And it was the only thing that I could hinge myself onto. Yeah. And then there was, like, the Africans, the Ghanaian side, which was often berated. I was called African booty scratcher. You know, I mean, I feel like everyone who's, you know, African and grew up here knows about that. And just sort of dealing with that. So I always knew that there was something, like, I wasn't Black the way Americans meant Black, but I really felt like, well, I want to be a part of this Black thing that's happening, you know? So for me, I just saw that, like, being Black wasn't this monolithic thing. Yeah. There was so
much richer.
I mean, it's beyond rich. Like, there's so much happening and going on with it. Yeah. And I was excited to be able to kind of put my stake in the ground and understand what that was. Yeah, what that was. Yeah.